Chapter 1. Answering 6 Common Interview Questions.
While you'll never be able to anticipate every question you might be asked in an interview, you can get a head start by developing strong, concise answers to commonly used questions. Most interviewers will ask similar questions like these to gain knowledge about a candidate's abilities and qualifications, and compatibility with the job and the company. 1. Tell me about yourself. This is often the opening question in an interview. It's also one of the most difficult if you're not prepared. Remember, the interviewer does not want to hear about your hometown or your hobby. This question calls for your 1-minute commercial that summarizes your years of experience and skills and your personality in the context of the job for which you are interviewing. Get to the point and sell your professional self. Develop a few brief sentences that demonstrate you have what it takes to do the job: experience, proven results, and desire to contribute. 2. Why should we hire you? The key to answering any question about you versus your competition is using specifics. Everybody is going to speak in generalities, so you need something that will make you stand out a bit, said Linda, a teacher in Springfield, Ohio. Give real examples that show them you are best suited for the job. Linda says she would point out her achievements and accomplishments throughout her career that are relevant to the open position, as well as her experiences in dealing with different types of students and teaching situations. Pinpoint the qualities you have that are truly valuable to the company. 3. Why do you want to work here? What do you know about our company? Peter, a physician in Indianapolis, said that research is important in answering these questions. I would use this opportunity to show off what I know about the company and, more importantly, how I would fit in. Susan, a vice president of benefits in Chicago, said that she would address issues and challenges in the company to demonstrate the depth of her knowledge. I usually talk about revenue, numbers of employees, and also challenges in their type of business and how my experience relates to that, she said. I would point out things I have done in similar companies that could address their problems. 4. What are your weaknesses? The secret to answering this question is using your weaknesses to your advantage. I would turn my weaknesses into strengths, said Tara, an attorney. For example, if my weaknesses include my lack of patience, I would then state that, because of this, I have learned to take special measures to ensure that I remain calm and attentive. Just make sure that you do give a real answer to this question. None of us is without faults, so don't pretend that you do not have weaknesses. 5. What did you dislike about your last job? Why did you leave your last job? You need to be cautious about these kinds of questions and make sure you do not end up sounding bitter. I would never talk down about my former company, the boss, or my former coworkers, Tara said. You need to have a good understanding about the job for which you're applying to turn this question into a positive one. It may be best to say that you really enjoyed many aspects of your job, then focus on how this new job will give you the opportunity to contribute more in a particular area that is key to the position. 6. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? An interviewer does not want to hear that your 5-year aspiration is to be sailing in the Caribbean or working in a different industry. You need to talk about goals you have that relate to the job. This will demonstrate that you understand the industry and the company and are motivated to succeed there. Susan, the director of public relations at a major car rental company, said she would keep her answer specific to her field, such as stating that she sees herself as Vice President of Corporate Communications. Preparation is the key to answering any question with poise and confidence. Always keep in mind, whatever the question is, that the interviewer is trying to uncover if you are a good fit and can make a positive contribution to the job.
Chapter 2 Young Women Changing the World by Jenny Ingley. The following article is from the website Take Part. This website gathers news, photos, and videos about today's issues and suggests actions people can take to make a difference. The website also provides stories of people who are working for change locally, nationally, and globally.
The Socket Team. Jessica Lynn, Jessica O. Matthews, Julia Silverman, and Hemily Thakar. Issue: Renewable Energy. In most African countries, more than 90% of the population lives without electricity. And if you've been to Africa, you know that almost that many people play soccer whenever they get the chance. But it took 4 young women to realize that all the energy being used on the field could be used to power people's homes. The magic soccer ball, created by Harvard students Jessica Lynn, Jessica Matthews, Julia Silverman, and Hemily Thakar, is beautiful in its simplicity. The socket captures energy from kick, dribble, and throw and stores it for later use. Kids can play a game, then bring the ball home and charge an LED lamp, cell phone, or battery. They no longer need to use unhealthy and expensive kerosene lamps or walk 3 hours to charge their cell phones. And down the line, the founders hope the socket will move beyond single-family homes to power hospitals and schools. But think of the immediate impact the ball can have on individual kids. Money is saved, families can afford to send their children to school, child labor decreases, and a better world emerges. Carmina Mansanon, founder, Stitch Tomorrow. Issue: Impoverished Youth. Through Stitch Tomorrow, a youth-led microfinance initiative in the Philippines and Indonesia, Carmina Mansanon, a 16-year-old from Tokyo, Japan, is empowering underprivileged girls by helping them create fashion lines out of second-hand materials. Stitch Tomorrow provides fashion and business education, capital, and resources to help the girls turn their clothing design ideas into a reality. Experts are on hand to help the young designers refine their concepts, create partnerships, find sponsors, and show their fashion lines on the runway. This year, Mansanon brought her idea for Stitch Tomorrow to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. As the youngest participant, she shared her hope for using fashion to bridge the gap between privileged and underprivileged youth around the world. Stephanie Cohen, founder, Kids Make a Difference. Issue: Endangered Manatees. In 2nd grade, Stephanie Cohen read an article about a baby manatee injured by a boat's propeller as it came up for air, an accident that claims the lives of many manatees every year. An article like that would affect most 8-year-olds. But how many would dedicate their lives to the issue? At least one. From that day forward, Cohen dedicated herself to raising awareness in her school and community about manatees, eventually starting a foundation called Kids Make a Difference. The organization brings youth together to fundraise for the preservation of wildlife and inspires volunteers to help animals around the world. Maggie Doyne, founder, the Blink Now Foundation. Issue: World Poverty. Trekking through the Himalayas after high school, Maggie Doyne met hundreds of orphaned and poverty-stricken Nepalese children. They stuck with her. Upon returning to her hometown of Mendham, New Jersey, she asked her community to help her build a safe and loving home for these children. To Doyne's surprise, her neighbors supported the idea. With their help, Doyne and the local Nepalese community built the Kopila Valley Children's Home, a home that provides young orphans, street children, child laborers, and abused children with an education, health care, and a loving place to grow up. Today, there are 25 children living in the home, and 60 children are enrolled in school through the Kopila Outreach Program. These young women prove that no matter how young you are, if you're passionate about a cause and take action, you're old enough to make a difference.
Chapter 3 Student Learning Teams by John N. Gardner and A. Jerome Jeweler from Your College Experience.
Research has shown that college students can learn as much or more from peers as they do from instructors and textbooks. When students work effectively in a supportive group, the experience can be a very powerful way to improve academic achievement and satisfaction with the learning experience. Recent interviews with college students at Harvard University revealed that nearly every senior who had been part of a study group considered this experience crucial to his or her academic progress and success. The list below describes several important activities that you and your study group or learning team can collaborate on. Activities for a learning team. 1. Sharing class notes. Team up with other students immediately after class to share and compare notes. One of your teammates may have picked up something you missed or vice versa. 2. Comparing ideas about assigned readings. After completing each week's readings, team up with other students to compare your highlighting and margin notes. See if you all agree on what the author's major points were and what information in the chapter you should study for exams. 3. Doing library research. Studies show that many students are unfamiliar with library research and sometimes experience library anxiety. Forming library research teams is an effective way to develop a social support group for reducing this fear and for locating and sharing information. 4. Meeting with the instructor. Having your team visit the instructor during office hours to seek additional assistance in preparing for exams is an effective team learning strategy for several reasons. If you are shy or unassertive, it may be easier to see an instructor in the company of other students. Your team visit also sends a message to the instructor that you are serious about learning. 5. Reviewing test results. After receiving test results, the members of a learning team can review their individual tests together to help one another identify the sources of their mistakes and to identify any model answers that received maximum credit. You can use this information to improve your performance on subsequent tests or assignments. Not all learning teams, however, are equally effective. Sometimes group work is unsuccessful or fails to reach its full potential because insufficient thought was given to how teams should be formed or how they should function. The following suggestions are strategies for maximizing the power of peer collaboration. Strategies for making a learning team successful. 1. In forming teams, seek peers who will contribute quality and diversity. Look for fellow students who are motivated, who attend class regularly, are attentive and participate actively while in class, and complete assignments on time. Include teammates from both genders, as well as students with different personality characteristics. Such variety will bring different life experiences and different styles of thinking and learning strategies to your team, which can increase both its quality and versatility. Furthermore, choosing only your friends or classmates who have similar interests and lifestyles can often result in a learning group that is more likely to get off track and onto topics that have nothing to do with the learning task. 2. Keep your group size small, 3 to 6 classmates. Smaller groups allow for more face-to-face interaction and eye contact, and less opportunity for any one individual to shirk his or her responsibility. Also, it's much easier for small groups to get together outside of class. Consider choosing an even number of teammates, so you can work in pairs in case the team decides to divide its work into separate parts for different members to work on. 3. Hold individual team members accountable for contributing to the learning of their teammates. Research on study groups at Harvard University indicates that they are effective only if each member has done the required coursework in advance of the group meeting. One way to ensure proper preparation is to ask each member to come to the group meeting prepared with specific information to share with teammates, as well as with questions on which they would like to receive help from the team. Another way to ensure that each teammate prepares properly for the meeting is to have individual members take on different roles or responsibilities. For example, each member could assume special responsibility for mastering a particular topic, section, or skill to be taught to the others. This course may be the perfect place for you to form learning teams and to start putting principles of good teamwork into practice. The teamwork skills you build in this course can be applied to your future courses, particularly those which you find most difficult. What's more, national surveys of employers consistently show that being able to work effectively in teams is one of the most important and valued skills in today's work world.
Chapter 4. Learning to Speak. Babies Prove Sound Learners by Emily Sohn from Science News.
It can be hard to know what newborns want. They can't talk, walk, or even point at what they're thinking about. Yet babies begin to develop language skills long before they begin speaking, according to recent research. And compared to adults, they develop these skills quickly. People have a tough time learning new languages as they grow older, but infants have the ability to learn any language, even fake ones, easily. For a long time, scientists have struggled to explain how such young children can learn the complicated grammatical rules and sounds required to communicate in words. Now, researchers are getting a better idea of what's happening in the brains of society's tiniest language learners. The insights might eventually help kids with learning disabilities as well as adults who want to learn new languages. The work might even help scientists who are trying to design computers that can communicate like people do. The brain of the baby is a new frontier, says Patricia Cull, co-director of the University of Washington's Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. The learning process. For decades, scientists have debated how the brains of young children figure out how to communicate using language. With help from new technologies and research strategies, scientists are now finding that babies begin life with the ability to learn any language. By interacting with other people and using their superb listening and watching skills, they quickly master the specific languages they hear most often. The baby brain is really flexible, says Rebecca Gomez, an experimental psychologist at the University of Arizona, Tucson. Babies can't say much, but they're learning a lot. Cull's research, for example, suggests that the progression from babbles like gaga to actual words like good morning begins with the ability to tell the difference between simple sounds, such as ga, ba, and da. Such studies show that, up to about 6 months of age, babies can recognize all the sounds that make up all the languages in the world. Their ability to do that shows that babies are prepared to learn any language, Cole says. That's why we call them citizens of the world. About 6,000 sounds make up the languages spoken around the globe, but not every language uses every sound. For example, while the Swedish language distinguishes among 16 vowel sounds, English uses only 8 vowel sounds, and Japanese uses just 5. Adults can hear only the sounds used in the languages they speak fluently. To a native Japanese speaker, for instance, the letters R and L sound identical. So, unlike someone whose native language is English, a Japanese speaker cannot tell row from low or rake from lake. Starting at around 6 months old, Cole says a baby's brain focuses on the most common sounds it hears. Then, children begin responding only to the sounds of the language they hear the most. In a similar way, Gomez has found slightly older babies start recognizing the patterns that make up the rules of their native language. In English, for example, kids who are about 18 months old start to figure out that words ending in ing or ed are usually verbs, and that verbs are action words. Language on the brain. Scientists are particularly interested in the brains of people who speak more than one language fluently, because that skill is hard to acquire after about age 7. In one of Cole's studies, for example, native Mandarin Chinese speakers spoke Chinese to 9-month-old American babies for 12 sessions over 4 weeks. Each session lasted about 25 minutes. At the end of the study, the American babies responded to Mandarin sounds just as well as did Chinese babies who had been hearing the language their entire lives. English-speaking teenagers and adults would not perform nearly as well. If a child regularly hears 2 languages, her brain forms a different pathway for each language. However, once the brain solidifies those electrical language pathways by around age 7, it gets harder to form new ones. By then, a baby's brain has disposed of, or pruned, all the unnecessary connections that the infant was born with. So, if you don't start studying Spanish or Russian until middle school, you must struggle against years of brain development, and progress can be frustrating. A 12-year-old's brain has to work much harder to forge language connections than an infant's brain does. We ought to be learning new languages between ages 0 and 7 when the brain does it naturally, Cole says. Learning from the baby brain. For teenagers and adults who want to learn new languages, baby studies may offer some useful tips. For one thing, researchers have found that it is far better for a language learner to talk with people who speak the language than to rely on educational CDs and DVDs with recorded conversations. When infants watched someone speaking a foreign language on TV, Cole found they had a completely different experience than they did if they watched the same speaker in real life. With real speakers, the babies' brains lit up with electrical activity when they heard the sounds they had learned. The babies were looking at the TV, and they seemed mesmerized, Cole says. Learning, however, did not happen. There was nothing going on in their brains, she says. Absolutely nothing.
Chapter 5. The Man in the Moon Has Company, by Alan M. McRobert, from the Boston Globe.
Have you ever really looked at the moon? Really looked? You might be surprised at how much you can see. The moon is the only world beyond the Earth whose landscape is laid out for view with the naked eye. If your eyesight is normal, or well corrected by glasses, you can make out a great many features on the moon's face: plains, mountainous regions, and the marks of meteorite impacts. The most obvious markings are dark gray patches. These are flat plains of lava. But 17th century astronomers using the newly invented telescope assumed they were water. They named each spot as if it were a sea, mare in Latin. The accompanying diagram identifies the largest seas. Mare Tranquillitatis, the Sea of Tranquility, is famous as the site where Neil Armstrong first set foot in 1969. To its upper left is Mare Serenitatis, the Sea of Serenity, and Mare Imbrium, the Sea of Rains. All three are roughly circular, the result of lava's flooding gigantic craters left by meteorite impacts when the moon was young. To their left is the larger, more formless Oceanus Procellarum, the Ocean of Storms, with Mare Humorum, Sea of Moisture, and Mare Numbium, Sea of Clouds, below it. The large bright areas are mountainous cratered terrain made of lighter-colored rock. Tiny bright patches in Oceanus Procellarum are splashes of bright-colored rock kicked up by the formation of individual craters. With a little imagination, the gray seas suggest a face, the familiar man in the moon, with his lopsided smile and weepy eyes. We are born with a brain that tries to find meaning everywhere, even in the most random, meaningless patterns. And human faces are what we are programmed to recognize most readily of all. So most people have no trouble seeing the man in the moon with his enigmatic clownish grin. Other cultures have seen other shapes in this celestial Rorschach test. A surprisingly wide variety of peoples saw a rabbit in the moon. According to the Aztecs, the moon was pure white until one of their gods flung a rabbit against it. In India, the story goes that a rabbit leaped into a fire to sacrifice himself to feed a starving beggar. The beggar turned out to be the god Indra in disguise. He put the rabbit on the moon so all could remember its act of generosity. In ancient China, the rabbit was carried there by the moon goddess Heng-O, who was fleeing her angry husband. The Chinese also saw a toad in the moon. Others have seen an old man carrying sticks, a beetle, and a woman reading a book. The ancient Greeks weren't satisfied with this sort of fantasy. Some wanted to know what the spots actually were. One idea was that they were reflections of the Earth's continents and seas. But others showed that this was not possible. Pluto of Chaeronea, a Romanized Greek who lived from about 46 to 120 CE, wrote a book titled On the Face of the Disk of the Moon. He reported a wide variety of opinions about the moon and gave arguments for and against each. He refuted some of those theories, such as the one that the markings were illusions in the eye of the beholder. Instead, he suggested, rightly, that the light and dark areas are composed of different materials. He demonstrated that the moon's phases prove it to be a solid, opaque sphere with a rough surface lit by sunlight, an object very much like the Earth. Extending this analogy, he declared that the moon was covered with mountains and valleys. This very correct idea may have been suggested by the small irregularities that can be seen in the moon's straight edge near its quarter phases. They are indeed shadows cast by lunar mountains. Plutarch recorded some even more remarkable ancient findings. He quotes Aristarchus as determining the moon to be between 0.31 and 0.40 the size of the Earth. Close enough. The true value is 0.27. He cites an unidentified philosopher who measured the moon's distance to be, in modern units, about 215,000 miles. The true value averages 240,000. All this was done with nothing but the naked eye, probably some crude sighting tools, and an excellent knowledge of geometry by people who had outgrown tales about faces and rabbits. Today, we're spoiled by technology. People think they can't see anything in the sky without a telescope, much less figure out what it is. But a good eye and brain can go a long way.
Chapter 6 Culture Shock by Bob Weinstein from the Boston Globe.
Saying Tamara Blackmore experienced culture shock when she arrived here last September is an understatement. It was more like culture trauma for this adventurous student who left Melbourne's Monash University to spend her junior year at Boston College, BC. Blackmore, 20, was joined at BC by 50 other exchange students from around the world. Like the thousands of exchange students who enroll in American colleges each year, Blackmore discovered firsthand there is a sea of difference between reading about and experiencing America firsthand. She felt the difference as soon as she stepped off the plane. As soon as she landed in Boston, Blackmore could feel the tension in the air. She was about to taste a lifestyle far more hectic than the one she left. Driving in Boston is crazy, says Blackmore. It took me a while to get used to the roads and the driving style here. I was always afraid someone was going to hit me. It was particularly tricky since the steering wheel was on the wrong side of the car. In Australia, it's on the right side. Beyond the cars and traffic jams, Blackmore said it took a while to get used to so many people in one place, all of whom seemed like they were moving at warp speed. There are only 18 million people in Australia spread out over an entire country, she says, compared to more than 6 million people in the state of Massachusetts alone. We don't have the kind of congestion you have in Boston. There is a whole different perception of space. The pressing problem for Blackmore was making a quick adjustment to the American lifestyle that felt like it was run by a stopwatch. For this easy-going Australian, Americans seem like perpetual motion machines. Americans are very time-oriented, Blackmore says. Everything is done according to a schedule. They're always busy, which made me feel guilty about wanting to just sit around and occasionally watch television. Australians, on the other hand, value their leisure time. The pace there is a lot slower because we don't feel the need to always be busy. It's not that Australians are lazy, it's just that they have a different concept of how time should be spent. Back home, I used to spend a lot more time just talking to my friends. It didn't take long for Blackmore to adjust to American rhythms. I felt the pressure to work harder and do more because everyone was running around doing so much, she says. When BC students weren't huddled over books, Blackmore found it odd that they were compulsively jogging, running, biking, or doing aerobics in order to be thin. Compared to home, the girls here are very skinny, she says. Before I got here, I heard a lot of stories about the pressure to be thin, and that many young American women have eating disorders. I'll go out with a friend and just tuck into a good meal and have a good time, whereas an American girl would just pick at her food. But it's BC's laid-back and friendly learning environment that sets it apart from her Melbourne college experience. Generally speaking, learning facilities are a lot better in Boston, she says. In Australia, students and teachers have little contact outside the classroom. It's a formal and depersonalized relationship. College is a place you go for a few hours every day and then go home. Your social life and school life are separate. It's just the opposite at BC, according to Blackmore. BC students and faculty are like one big happy family, she says. There is a real sense of team spirit. It's like we're all in this together. Going to school here is a lifestyle, whereas at home, we're just a number. We attend school to get a degree so we can graduate, get a job, and get on with our lives. Another pleasant shocker was the close and open relationships American students enjoy with their teachers. It's a sharp contrast to Australia, where college students keep a discreet but respectful distance from their teachers. I was surprised when I learned students go out to dinner with their lecturers, she says. We just don't do that back home. Professors deal with hundreds of students, and you're lucky if they remember your name. When Blackmore returns to Australia at the end of the school year, she'll have plenty of memories, most of them good ones. BC, like most American colleges, has gone out of its way to create a memorable experience for Blackmore and its other exchange students.
Chapter 7. Private Lives by Diane Daniel. From the St. Petersburg Times. Life seems a little less fragile when you can depend on a special place to always be there for you.
There is a tiny slice of the Gulf of Mexico that belongs to me. Looking across the water or down the shoreline, I see the past 20 years play over and over, like an old Super 8 movie. I'm 16, writing poetry while sitting on a bench at sunset. I'm floating atop the salty sea on my yellow raft. I'm sitting at the water's edge, gathering a rainbow of shells. I'm in college, burgundy hair glistening. I'm a working woman, thinking about my career, paying the bills. I'm heavy, I'm thin. My hair is long, short, long again. I'm happy, sad, growing older, growing up. My parents and I moved from North Carolina to St. Petersburg, Florida, when I was just about to start my senior year of high school. It was a difficult time to be uprooted. I had lived in North Carolina all my life, but I loved the water, so Florida seemed an okay place to live. I can't remember how I first chose my special beach at the end of 8th Avenue, but once I chose my spot, I never switched beaches. Almost daily I swam and sunned there. I watched the sunset. I thought about life. On weekend nights in college, I hung out at the beach with friends, playing music or just listening to the waves. My bedroom at my parents' house holds no memories for me. My memories of Florida are all a mile away at 8th Avenue Beach. I live in Boston now and visit my parents in Florida twice a year. Whenever I visit, I spend many hours at my beach, usually under a hot sun, but sometimes at night, when the sand is cool and the sea seems to offer answers it won't share during the day. I go to my beach not only to relax and think, but also to feed off the sea. The waves are gentle, the water soothing, but more important to me is the sea's permanence and sheer force. I want to be strong like that. During one visit to Florida last year, I was sad about the end of a relationship, and I knew that my sadness would worry my parents. I had to stop at 8th Avenue before I could see them. After flying in from Boston, I drove straight to the beach. It was late afternoon in May, and the sun had softened. When I reached the beach, I parked at the end of 8th Avenue and slowly walked barefoot to the water. I tasted the Gulf, and with it, some hope. I have taken a few friends to my sanctuary, but it's not a place I share with many. 5 years ago, I brought Jack, a former boyfriend, and I'm glad I did. Now when I look down the shore or across the water, he is there too, laughing at the pelicans as they dive for food, holding me while we watch the sunset from the edge of the water. Jack will always be there. So will my friend Joellen, who came to 8th Avenue with me a couple of years ago. We walked and walked until the sun and sand had exhausted us. Sometimes I talk my mother into going to watch the sunset, and we sit on the bench, appreciating our time together. Last year, I had planned to take Tom to 8th Avenue. He was going to be the most important visitor of all, the person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. A few days before we were supposed to leave, he changed his mind about the trip to Florida and about us. I'm glad he never saw my beach. As long as my parents are alive, I will go to 8th Avenue. It has occurred to me that I will probably mourn their deaths there, listening to the waves and watching the gulls. I wonder how often I will see my beach after my parents are gone. I'm sure I will go there from time to time, maybe even stay in one of the cottages nearby that I've passed so often. But it doesn't matter. My tiny slice of the Gulf of Mexico is always within reach.
Chapter 8. A Young Blind Whiz on Computers by Tom Pensinger from the Wall Street Journal.
Sometimes a perceived disability turns out to be an asset on the job. Though he is only 18 years old and blind, Süleyman Gökyiğit is among the top computer technicians and programmers at Intellidata Technologies Corp., a large software company with several offices across the United States. After a merger last October, two disparate computer networks were driving us crazy, recalls Douglas Braun, an Intellidata vice president. We couldn't even send email to each other. In 3 weeks, Mr. Gökyiğit, a University of Toledo sophomore who works part-time at Intellidata's office in the city, created the software needed to integrate the two networks. None of the company's 350 other employees could have done the job in 3 months, says Mr. Braun. Süleyman can literally see into the heart of the computer. Mr. Gökyiğit's gift, as Mr. Braun calls it, is an unusual ability to conceptualize the innards of a machine. The computer permits me to reach out into the world and do almost anything I want to do, says Mr. Gökyiğit, who is a computer science engineering major with straight A's. Like most blind people who work with computers, Mr. Gökyiğit uses a voice synthesizer that reads the video display on his monitor in a mechanical voice. Devices that produce braille screen displays are also available, but Mr. Gökyiğit says they waste time. Instead, he depends on memory. Turning the synthesizer to top speed, he remembers almost everything he hears, at least until a project is completed. While the synthesizer talks, Mr. Gökyiğit mentally maps the computer screen with numbered coordinates, such as 3 across, 2 down, and memorizes the location of each icon on the grid so he can call up files with his mouse. The young programmer is also at home with hardware, thanks partly to a highly developed sense of touch. Mitzi Nowakowski, an office manager at Intellidata, recalls how he easily disconnected and reconnected their computer systems during a move last year. Through feel, Süleyman can locate connectors, pins, and wires much faster than most other people with sight, she says. Mr. Gökyiğit was born in Turkey, where at age 2 he developed an eye condition that left him blind. His parents brought him to the Mayo Clinic in the U.S., but nothing could be done. His doctors kept emphasizing, "Never shelter him or pity him," recalls his father Hasan. Today, Mr. Gökyiğit's co-workers call him Süleyman the Magnificent, after the 16th century Turkish sultan who greatly expanded the Ottoman Empire. Several months ago, on a trip to San Francisco, Mr. Braun had difficulty accessing the company's mainframe using his laptop. He needed specific numbers to get into 4 Intellidata files. Instead of asking someone to manually search a thick logbook of computer addresses, he called Mr. Gökyiğit, who had committed the logbook to memory and produced the proper numbers in 10 seconds, Mr. Braun says. Much of the student programmer's speed comes from his ability to block out distractions while at the computer. When typing, he listens intently to the synthesizer. His long, thin fingers fly over the keyboard. Nothing seems to shake his concentration, says Ms. Nowakowski, his immediate boss. Mr. Gökyiğit is the only company employee on call 24 hours a day. We consider him our top troubleshooter, says Mr. Braun.
Chapter 9. How to Make a Speech by George Plimpton from How to Use the Power of the Printed Word.
One of life's terrors for the uninitiated is to be asked to make a speech. Why me will probably be your first reaction. I don't have anything to say. The fact is that each one of us has a store of material which should be of interest to others. There is no reason why it should not be adapted to a speech. Why know how to speak? Scary as it is, it's important for anyone to be able to speak in front of others, whether 20 around a conference table or a hall filled with 1,000 faces. Being able to speak can mean better grades in any class. It can mean talking the town council out of increasing your property taxes. It can mean talking top management into buying your plan. How to pick a topic. You were probably asked to speak in the first place in the hope that you would be able to articulate a topic that you know something about. Still, it helps to find out about your audience first. Who are they? Why are they there? What are they interested in? How much do you already know about your subject? How to plan what to say. Here is where you must do your homework. The more you sweat in advance, the less you'll have to sweat once you appear on stage. Research your topic thoroughly. Check the library for facts, quotes, books, and timely magazine and newspaper articles on your subject. Get in touch with experts. Write to them, make phone calls, get interviews to help round out your material. In short, gather and learn far more than you'll ever use. You can't imagine how much confidence that knowledge will inspire. Now start organizing and writing. Most authorities suggest that a good speech breaks down into 3 basic parts: an introduction, the body of the speech, and the summation. Introduction. An audience makes up its mind very quickly. Once the mood of an audience is set, it is difficult to change it, which is why introductions are important. If the speech is to be light-hearted in tone, the speaker can start off by telling a good-natured story about the subject or himself. Main body. There are 4 main intents in the body of the well-made speech. These are 1. To entertain, which is probably the hardest. 2. To instruct, which is the easiest if the speaker has done the research and knows the subject. 3. To persuade, which one does at a sales presentation, a political rally, or a town meeting. And finally, 4. To inspire, which is what the speaker emphasizes at a sales meeting, in a sermon, or at a pep rally. Summation. An ending should probably incorporate a sentence or 2 which sounds like an ending. A short summary of the main points of the speech, perhaps, or the repeat of a phrase that most embodies what the speaker has hoped to convey. It is valuable to think of the last sentence or 2 as something which might produce applause. Phrases which are perfectly appropriate to signal this are, in closing, or I have one last thing to say. How to sound spontaneous. The best speakers are those who make their words sound spontaneous even if memorized. I found it's best to learn a speech point by point, not word for word. Careful preparation and a great deal of practicing are required to make it come together smoothly and easily. Mark Twain once said, "It takes 3 weeks to prepare a good ad-lib speech." Brevity is an asset. A sensible plan, if you have been asked to speak to an exact limit, is to talk your speech into a mirror and stop at your allotted time. Then cut the speech accordingly. The more familiar you become with your speech, the more confidently you can deliver it. As anyone who listens to speeches knows, brevity is an asset. 20 minutes are ideal. An hour is the limit an audience can listen comfortably. How questions help. A question period at the end of a speech is a good notion. One would not ask questions following a tribute to the company treasurer on his retirement, say, but a technical talk or an informative speech can be enlivened with a question period. The crowd. The larger the crowd, the easier it is to speak because the response is multiplied and increased. Most people do not believe this. They peek out from behind the curtain, and if the audience is filled to the rafters, they begin to moan softly in the back of their throats. What about stage fright? Very few speakers escape the so-called butterflies. There does not seem to be any cure for them except to realize that they are beneficial rather than harmful, and never fatal. The tension usually means that the speaker, being keyed up, will do a better job. Edward R. Murrow called stage fright the sweat of perfection. Mark Twain once comforted a fright-frozen friend about to speak. Just remember, they don't expect much. My own feeling is that with thought, preparation, and faith in your ideas, you can go out there and expect a pleasant surprise.
Chapter 10 Conversational Ball Games by Nancy Masterson Sakamoto. From Polite Fictions: Why Japanese and Americans Seem Rude to Each Other.
After I was married and had lived in Japan for a while, my Japanese gradually improved to the point where I could take part in simple conversations with my husband and his friends and family. And I began to notice that often, when I joined in, the others would look startled, and the conversational topic would come to a halt. After this happened several times, it became clear to me that I was doing something wrong, but for a long time I didn't know what it was. Finally, after listening carefully to many Japanese conversations, I discovered what my problem was. Even though I was speaking Japanese, I was handling the conversation in a Western way. Japanese-style conversations develop quite differently from Western-style conversations, and the difference isn't only in the languages. I realized that just as I kept trying to hold Western-style conversations even when I was speaking Japanese, so my English students kept trying to hold Japanese-style conversations even when they were speaking English. We were unconsciously playing entirely different conversational ball games. A Western-style conversation between two people is like a game of tennis. If I introduce a topic, a conversational ball, I expect you to hit it back. If you agree with me, I don't expect you simply to agree and do nothing more. I expect you to add something, a reason for agreeing, another example, or an elaboration to carry the idea further. But I don't expect you always to agree. I am just as happy if you question me or challenge me or completely disagree with me. Whether you agree or disagree, your response will return the ball to me. And then it is my turn again. I don't serve a new ball from my original starting line. I hit your ball back again from where it has bounced. I carry your idea further, or answer your questions or objections, or challenge or question you. And so the ball goes back and forth. If there are more than two people in the conversation, then it is like doubles in tennis or like volleyball. There's no waiting in line. Whoever is nearest and quickest hits the ball. And if you step back, someone else will hit it. No one stops the game to give you a turn. You're responsible for taking your own turn. But whether it's two players or a group, everyone does his or her best to keep the ball going, and no one person has the ball for very long. A Japanese-style conversation, however, is not at all like tennis or volleyball. It's like bowling. You wait for your turn, and you always know your place in line. It depends on such things as whether you are older or younger, a close friend or a relative stranger to the previous speaker, in a senior or junior position, and so on. When your turn comes, you step up to the starting line with your bowling ball and carefully bowl it. Everyone else stands back and watches politely, murmuring encouragement. Everyone waits until the ball has reached the end of the alley and watches to see if it knocks down all the pins, or only some of them, or none of them. There is a pause while everyone registers your score. Then, after everyone is sure that you have completely finished your turn, the next person in line steps up to the same starting line with a different ball. He doesn't return your ball, and he does not begin from where your ball stopped. And there is always a suitable pause between turns. There is no rush, no scramble for the ball. No wonder everyone looked startled when I took part in Japanese conversations. I paid no attention to whose turn it was and kept snatching the ball halfway down the alley and throwing it back at the bowler. Of course, the conversation died. I was playing the wrong game. But if you have been trained all your life to play one game, it is no simple matter to switch to another, even if you know the rules. Knowing the rules is not at all the same thing as playing the game. Even now, during a conversation in Japanese, I will notice a startled reaction and belatedly realize that once again, I have rudely interrupted by instinctively trying to hit back the other person's bowling ball. It is no easier for me to just listen during a conversation than it is for my Japanese students to just relax when speaking with foreigners. Now I can truly sympathize with how hard they must find it to try to carry on a Western-style conversation.
Chapter 11. Letters of Application by Andrea B. Geffner. From Business Letters the Easy Way.
A letter of application is a sales letter in which you are both salesperson and product. For the purpose of an application is to attract an employer's attention and persuade him or her to grant you an interview. To do this, the letter presents what you can offer the employer rather than what you want from the job. Like a resume, the letter of application is a sample of your work, and it is, as well, an opportunity to demonstrate, not just talk about, your skills and personality. If it is written with flair and understanding and prepared with professional care, it is likely to hit its mark. There are two types of application letters. A solicited letter is sent in response to a help-wanted ad. Because such a letter will be in competition with many, perhaps several hundred others, it must be composed with distinction. At the same time, it must refer to the ad and the specific job advertised. An unsolicited letter is sent to a company for which you would like to work, though you know of no particular opening. The advantage of this type of application, however, is that there will be little competition, and you can define yourself the position you would like to apply for. You can send out as many letters as you wish to as many companies as you are aware of. It is a good idea, though, to find out the name of a specific person to whom you can send the letter, a more effective approach than simply addressing the letter to personnel. Because a letter of application must sell your qualifications, it must do more than simply restate your resume in paragraph form. While the resume must be factual, objective, and brief, the letter is your chance to interpret and expand. It should state explicitly how your background relates to the specific job, and it should emphasize your strongest and most pertinent characteristics. The letter should demonstrate that you know both yourself and the company. A letter of application must communicate your ambition and enthusiasm, yet it must, at the same time, be modest. It should be neither aggressive nor meek, neither pat yourself on the back nor ask for sympathy. It should never express dissatisfaction with a present or former job or employer, and you should avoid discussing your reasons for leaving your last job. Keep in mind the following principles when writing your letter of application. 1. Start by attracting attention. You must say, of course, that you are applying and mention both the specific job and how you heard about it. But try to avoid a mundane opening. Instead of, "I would like to apply for the position of legal secretary," which you advertised in the Los Angeles Times of Sunday, August 10th, try something a bit more original. I believe you will find my experiences in the Alameda District Attorney's Office have prepared me well for the position of legal secretary, which you advertised in the Los Angeles Times of Sunday, August 10th. 2. Continue by describing your qualifications. Highlight your strengths and achievements, and say how they suit you for the job at hand. Provide details and explanations not found on your resume, and refer the reader to the resume for the remaining less pertinent facts. 3. Assure the employer that you are the person for the job. List verifiable facts that prove you are not exaggerating or lying. Mention the names of any familiar or prominent references you may have. In some way, Distinguish yourself from the mass of other qualified applicants. 4. Conclude by requesting an interview. Urge the employer to action by making it easy to contact you. Mention your telephone number and the best hours to reach you, or state that you will call him or her within a few days. A complete application should contain both a letter of application and a resume. While it is possible to write a letter so complete in detail that a resume seems redundant, it is always most professional to include both. Finally, a word about salary. Basically, unless instructed by the want ad, it is best that you not broach the subject. Indeed, even if an ad requires that you mention your salary requirements, it is advisable simply to call them negotiable. However, when you go on and interview, you should be prepared to mention a salary range, for example, $40,000 to $45,000. For this reason, you should investigate both your field and, if possible, the particular company. You don't want to ask for less than you deserve or more than is reasonable.
Chapter 12. Out to Lunch by Joe Robinson from Escape magazine. A big meal and a long nap is still a way of life in Madrid.
Birds do it, cats do it, and Spaniards most especially do it. Every day in broad daylight. They nap. Grown adults, executives, teachers, civil servants wink off in the middle of the workday. From 1 or 2 o'clock to 4:30 or so every afternoon, Spain stops the world for a stroll home, a leisurely meal, and a few Z's. Common market technocrats have informed the Spanish that this is not the way things will get done in a unified Europe. At a time when productivity is the world's largest religion, the siesta tradition lives on. In Spain, work operates under the command of life instead of the other way around. No task is so critical that it can't wait a couple of hours while you attend to more important matters, like eating, relaxing, or catching up on sleep. When the midday break hits, office is empty and streets clear. Befuddled foreigners quickly learn that they have entered a new circadian order. At first, I kept looking for things to do in the afternoon, and I just couldn't believe that nothing was open, recalls Pierre Roberts, an Oakland writer who lived in Spain for several years. I walked the streets of Madrid looking for somewhere to go. It was 1,000 degrees outside. You could see the heat waves, and it was like a ghost town. Taking a long break in the middle of the day is not only healthier than the conventional lunch, it's apparently more natural. Sleep researchers have found that the Spanish biorhythm may be tuned more closely to our biological clocks. Studies suggest that humans are biphasic creatures, requiring days broken up by 2 periods of sleep instead of one monophasic shift. The drowsiness you feel after lunch comes not from the food, but from the time of day. All animals, including humans, have a biological rhythm, explains Claudio Stampi, director of the Chronobiology Research Institute in Newton, Massachusetts. One is a 24-hour rhythm. We get tired by the end of the day and go to sleep. And there is a secondary peak of sleepiness and a decrease in alertness in the early afternoon. Some people have difficulty remaining awake, doing any sort of task between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. For others, it's less difficult, but it's there. So there is a biological reason for siestas. Unlike the average lunch break, the siesta is a true break in the action because there is no choice but to come to a full and complete stop. You can't do errands, the shops are closed. You can't make business calls, nobody's at the office. Most people go home for lunch or get together with family or friends and nod out afterwards. The Spanish need their sleep. They've got a long night ahead of them. Because another key component of the siesta lifestyle is its nocturnal orbit. After the afternoon work shift, from 4:30 to 8 p.m. or so, they may join friends for a drink. Dinner starts at 9 or 10 p.m., and from there it's out on the town until 1 or 2 in the morning. It's a bad night in Madrid if you get home before 6 in the morning, laughs Roberts. The siesta's origins lie in climate and architecture. Like people in other places around the globe that are blast furnaces much of the year, Spaniards turned to shade and stillness to avoid incineration in the middle of the day. At night, packed, simmering dwellings drove people into the streets to cool down. While climate is still a factor, the siesta lifestyle today is driven primarily by the social imperative of Spanish life, which places an equal, if not greater, emphasis on life outside the office. We are not so obsessed only with work, says Florentino Sotomayor of the Spanish Tourist Board. We take a break and have the opportunity of having coffee with friends and thinking and talking about different issues, not only work.
Chapter 13. Public Attitudes Toward Science by Stephen Hawking. From Black Holes and Baby Universes and Other Essays.
Whether we like it or not, the world we live in has changed a great deal in the last 100 years, and it is likely to change even more in the next 100. Some people would like to stop these changes and go back to what they see as a purer and simpler age. But, as history shows, the past was not that wonderful. It was not so bad for a privileged minority, though even they had to do without modern medicine, and childbirth was highly risky for women. But for the vast majority of the population, life was nasty and short. Anyway, even if one wanted to, one couldn't put the clock back to an earlier age. Knowledge and techniques can't just be forgotten. Nor can one prevent further advances in the future. Even if all government money for research were cut off, the force of competition would still bring about advances in technology. Moreover, one cannot stop inquiring minds from thinking about basic science, whether or not they were paid for it. If we accept that we cannot prevent science and technology from changing our world, we can at least try to ensure that the changes they make are in the right directions. In a democratic society, this means that the public needs to have a basic understanding of science so that it can make informed decisions and not leave them in the hands of experts. At the moment, the public has a rather ambivalent attitude towards science. It has come to expect the steady increase in the standard of living that new developments in science and technology have brought to continue, but it also distrusts science because it doesn't understand it. This distrust is evident in the cartoon figure of the mad scientist working in his laboratory to produce a Frankenstein. But the public also has a great interest in science, as is shown by the large audiences for science fiction. What can be done to harness this interest and give the public the scientific background it needs to make informed decisions on subjects like acid rain, the greenhouse effect, nuclear weapons, and genetic engineering? Clearly, the basis must lie in what is taught in schools. But in schools, science is often presented in a dry and uninteresting manner. Children must learn it by rote to pass examinations, and they don't see its relevance to the world around them. Moreover, science is often taught in terms of equations. Although equations are a concise and accurate way of describing mathematical ideas, they frighten most people. Scientists and engineers tend to express their ideas in the form of equations because they need to know the precise value of quantities. But for the rest of us, a qualitative grasp of scientific concepts is sufficient, and this can be conveyed by words and diagrams without the use of equations. The science people learn in school can provide the basic framework, but the rate of scientific progress is now so rapid that there are always new developments that have occurred since one was at school or university. I never learned about molecular biology or transistors at school, but genetic engineering and computers are two of the developments most likely to change the way we live in the future. Popular books and magazine articles about science can help to put across new developments, but even the most successful popular book is read by only a small proportion of the population. There are some very good science programs on TV, but others present scientific wonders simply as magic without explaining them or showing how they fit into the framework of scientific ideas. Producers of television science programs should realize that they have a responsibility to educate the public, not just entertain it. What are the science-related issues that the public will have to make decisions on in the near future? By far the most urgent is that of nuclear weapons. Other global problems, such as food supply or the greenhouse effect, are relatively slow-acting, but a nuclear war could mean the end of all human life on Earth within days. The relaxation of East-West tensions has meant that the fear of nuclear war has receded from public consciousness. But the danger is still there as long as there are enough weapons to kill the entire population of the world many times over. Nuclear weapons are still poised to strike all the major cities in the Northern Hemisphere. It would only take a computer error to trigger a global war. If we manage to avoid a nuclear war, there are still other dangers that could destroy us all. There's a sick joke that the reason we have not been contacted by an alien civilization is that civilizations tend to destroy themselves when they reach our stage. But I have sufficient faith in the good sense of the public to believe that we might prove this wrong.
Chapter 14. The Art of Genius. 6 Ways to Think Like Einstein. By Michael Michalko. From the Futurist Utne Reader.
How do geniuses come up with ideas? What links the thinking style that produced Mona Lisa with the one that spawned the theory of relativity? What can we learn from the thinking strategies of the Galileos, Edisons, and Mozarts of history? For years, scholars tried to study genius by analyzing statistics. In 1904, Havelock Ellis noted that most geniuses were fathered by men older than 30, had mothers younger than 25, and usually were sickly children. Other researchers reported that many were celibate, Descartes, fatherless, Dickens, or motherless, Darwin. In the end, the data illuminated nothing. Academics also tried to measure the links between intelligence and genius. But they found that run-of-the-mill physicists had IQs much higher than Nobel Prize winner and extraordinary genius Richard Feynman, whose IQ was a merely respectable 122. Genius is not about mastering 14 languages at the age of 7, or even being especially smart. Creativity is not the same as intelligence. Most people of average intelligence can figure out the expected conventional response to a given problem. For example, when asked, "What is 1/2 of 13?" most of us immediately answer 6 1/2. That's because we tend to think reproductively. When confronted with a problem, we sift through what we've been taught and what has worked for us in the past, select the most promising approach, and work toward the solution. Geniuses, on the other hand, think productively. They ask, "How many different ways can I look at this problem?" and "How many ways can I solve it?" A productive thinker, for example, would find a number of ways to have 13. The mark of genius is the willingness to explore all the alternatives, not just the most likely solution. Reproductive thinking fosters rigidity. This is why we often fail when we're confronted with a new problem that appears on the surface to be similar to others we've solved, but is, in fact, significantly different. Interpreting a problem through your past experience will inevitably lead you astray. If you think the way you've always thought, you'll get what you've always gotten. For centuries, the Swiss dominated the watch industry. But in 1968, when a U.S. inventor unveiled a battery-powered watch at the World Watch Congress, every Swiss watch manufacturer rejected it because it didn't fit their limited paradigm. Meanwhile, Seiko, a Japanese electronics company, took one look at the invention and proceeded to change the future of the world watch market. By studying the notebooks, correspondence, and conversations of some of the world's great thinkers in science, art, and industry, scholars have identified the following thinking strategies that enable geniuses to generate original ideas. 1. Geniuses look at problems from all angles. Sigmund Freud's analytical methods were designed to find details that didn't fit traditional paradigms in order to come up with a completely new point of view. To solve a problem creatively, you must abandon the first approach that comes to mind, which usually stems from past experience, and reconceptualize the problem. Geniuses do not merely solve existing problems, they identify new ones. 2. Geniuses make their thought visible. Geniuses develop visual and spatial abilities that allow them to display information in new ways. The explosion of creativity in the Renaissance was tied to the development of graphic illustration during that period, notably the scientific diagrams of Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo Galilei. Galileo revolutionized science by making his thought graphically visible, while his contemporaries used more conventional means. 3. Geniuses produce. Thomas Edison held 1,093 patents, still a record. He guaranteed a high level of productivity by giving himself idea quotas. One minor invention every 10 days and a major invention every 6 months. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote a cantata every week, even when he was sick or exhausted. Wolfgang Mozart produced more than 600 pieces of music. 4. Geniuses make novel combinations. Like playful children with buckets of building blocks, geniuses constantly combine and recombine ideas, images, and thoughts. The laws of heredity were developed by Gregor Mendel, who combined mathematics and biology to create a new science of genetics. 5. Geniuses force relationships. Their facility to connect the unconnected enables geniuses to see things others miss. Da Vinci noticed the similarity between the sound of a bell and a stone hitting water, and concluded that sound travels in waves. 6. Geniuses prepare themselves for chance. Whenever we attempt to do something and fail, we end up doing something else. That's the first principle of creative accident. We may ask ourselves why we have failed to do what we intended, which is a reasonable question. But the creative accident leads to the question, what have we done? Answering that one in a novel, unexpected way is the essential creative act. It is not luck, but creative insight of the highest order. This may be the most important lesson of all. When you find something interesting, drop everything and go with it. Too many talented people fail to make significant leaps of imagination because they've become fixated on their preconceived plan. But not the truly great minds. They don't wait for gifts of chance. They make them happen.